yeah, the Adil Shah ruling Goa, pre-Portuguese. Okay, and it is said that Adil Shah had imposed high taxes on the locals. So to save them from these taxes imposed by Adil Shah, you have two locals, the Moja Knight and Pai Vednekar, who approached the Portuguese who were already in Cochin in 1498. And hence they come to Goa and capture Goa. In fact, there is a beautiful painting that I think on display in the museum called as the Triumphant Trio. Okay. This trio is none other than Pai Verneker, Timoja Naik, and Alphonse de Albuquerque in the center. And they are shown standing on a pile of dead bodies. Now, who are these dead bodies? It is interesting to state that, for example, say I was, say, Alphonse de Albuquerque and Nilanpur was Verneker, and you were his friends, and say you had got converted to Christianity, Nilanpur would go and complain about you to me, saying that so and so has performed a puja in his house. And this is what was not agreed to by the Portuguese, because once you converted to Christianity, you had to follow Christianity and not any other faith. So those were the punishments that the neo converts had to face, and those are the dead bodies that you see under the trio standing. Okay, so that is what is shown there. Now, with the Portuguese come multiple missionaries. The first missionaries to come to Goa with the Portuguese were the Franciscans. Okay, yeah, so the others come very later. And when you have missionaries coming in with their religious beliefs, the Portuguese followed something called as Padroado. Padroado is in patronage. So it was like the religion of the king had to be the religion of the followers. Yeah. So hence they came with their faith, that is Roman Catholicism, and when they brought their faith, they needed places of worship. And hence they thought there was a need to construct churches, there was a need to construct chapels. And there was absolutely no kind of information on any styles of architecture on churches and chapels in Goa. So they had to initially depend on aesthetics that were completely European and came from Portugal. Okay. And now, architecturally, they could copy something, but who would do this? Who would build these churches in Goa? There were no European nations who came along, so it was on the locals that the Portuguese had to strongly depend on. Okay, and hence they used their own idioms and their own styles were created that were the locals used to build the churches that they did. Okay. So for the first 10 years that they came, it is said that the Portuguese were in their ships, they didn't do much. And later on, gradually they started expanding, they came down and they started constructing chapels and churches and courts and so on and so forth. Okay, so when I say the Portuguese came in, when did they come? When did they come to Goa?
1510.
1510. 1510 they came, but we all think that they came once and they conquered Goa for the first time when they came. So that is not the case. So they came initially on the 17th of February 1510. Okay, and they launched an attack on Ellapura. Then Ellapura is today's old Goa. Right? So before the Portuguese who was there, Adil Shah was there. So do you think Adil Shah would say, "Come, welcome to my territory"? Not at all. So he would have had a strong, huge battle with the Portuguese. And that is the time the Portuguese lost this battle. Okay, but they lost the battle, but probably didn't lose hope. So they remained in River Mandovi for some time, for about 8 months, and launched a second attack on the 25th of November 1510. And this is the time they were successful in capturing the city of Goa. And hence, that was the first battle that was fought against Europeans on Indian soil. Okay, that was in 1510 itself. So it is important to mention here that Christianity was able to survive in Goa only because of its ability to adapt. If it was rigid, it would have died off very soon. So the early origins of Christian art means that. Okay, so early origins. So the earliest missionaries who came in, I call them as missionaries in a hurry or missionaries in a haste. So why I call them that? I give them that name because these missionaries who came were not natives, they came from outside, right? So they didn't have the time to learn the local language of Goa, that is Konkani. So how would they communicate? In fact, there is an interesting proverb in Goa, in Konkani, it goes in Konkani, many of you might have heard it. It says that "Aam gelolo olle ashen, kun sharma sanglo firgi bashen." What does this mean? I went with great hope to listen to a sermon, but the sermon was in a foreign language and hence I couldn't understand. Okay, this tells you two things. Firstly, that initially when the Portuguese came, the sermons were in Portuguese, brother. And it also tells you something else, that when many so-called nationalists will boast and say that conversions in Goa were all forceful, it was not the case. Now this proverb itself says, I went with great hope to listen to a sermon. A person who's dragged into Catholicism wouldn't have gone with great hope to listen to a sermon in a church. So this is a testimony to show that many conversions were voluntary as well. Okay, so after that, why do I call them missionaries in a case? They didn't have time to learn Konkani very soon, but yet they wanted to spread Christianity. So how do they do that? So art was the only medium which they could use to communicate what they wanted to, be it in the form of sculpture, in the form of paintings, in the form of theatre and drama and processions and all sorts of things. Okay, so why do you think we have processions in the church which are so colorful with streamers of multiple colors? And you also have recently celebrated the Three Kings Feast, which we know as today. It's enacted only in 3 places of Goa. Why this enacting thing was needed in the church? So that people understood the concept through acting, because maybe it was difficult to communicate. So interestingly, this Three Kings festival or feast is celebrated globally throughout the world, but in Goa it is enacted only in 3 places. Which are the 3 places? Anyone can tell me? Which are the 3 places?
Go.
Okay. The second one?
Very. And Kasauli.
Kansauli. Okay.
And Veren.
The third one?
Veren.
Veren. And any other place that you know?
Race marks.
Race marks. Okay. So why only these few places that the feast is enacted, and why not everywhere? So this is not documented anywhere, but this is my personal observation that probably to enact this feast you needed 2 prerequisites. The two requisites needed are, firstly you needed a hill or a month where the procession would lead. Secondly, you needed the horses. So the warrior class community comes into picture, that is the Kshatriya community. So wherever you have the Kshatriyas and the month, you have this feast enacted. Even if one of these prerequisites is met and the other is not met, this feast is not enacted. 2 good examples are Margaon and Benauli. They have a month, but no Kshatriyas in the vicinity. You have Brahmins. So hence this feast is not enacted. Okay, so this may or may not be correct. This is just my observations that I have made down the line. So with the Portuguese came missionaries and learned people, but we didn't have artists and silversmiths, goldsmiths, so they were much more in demand. Okay. Now what we see here, church altars and naves were constructed and richly decorated to make them as attractive as possible to new converts. Okay, so those who are converted, they should be kind of taken away with the buildings constructed, which made them feel like coming to church. So they had to be richly decorated and made as beautiful as possible. Okay, so that is one reason probably they had these elaborate decorations in churches. So was it that art never existed in Goa before the Portuguese? Not at all. Goa was blessed with lots and lots of beautiful art even before the Portuguese. In fact, these artists and the art itself was appreciated by the Portuguese so much that they felicitated many of the artists from Goa in Portugal also. Okay. So, for instance, as I mentioned here, you have Kavi art. Now, what is Kavi art? Many of you might be familiar with this. It's not a new topic now. So, Kavi art is this. I'll show you a picture. So, this is what you see. It's Kavi. So, it's red and white, right? Only 2 colors. So, how old is this art form? So we do not really know, because the surviving Kavi that we have is about from the 17th to the 18th century. We don't have Kavi older than that for 2 reasons, maybe because of Goa experiences a heavy monsoon, so if at all it was on the exteriors, it washed off. Or a lot of temples also were brought down during the Portuguese regime. Also, it could be because of the fact that due to maintenance and lack of awareness among custodians, they have just destroyed what exists. So that is what happens today. So what you see, what is Kavi, how it is done. So there is something called as Kavi and there is something called as graffito. Okay, both may look similar from a distance, but they are slightly different. So what happens in Kavi? So Kavi is a technique where you plaster the wall in white lime, okay, in thick white plaster. When the plaster is wet, you take a sharp tool and a stencil and carve out the designs from the wet plaster. Okay, and once you carve out, you create the depressions, right? So then you fill in the blanks with another mixture of red soil, charcoal, and a plant binder that was generally used. So that is the filling that is done, and then it is burnished using a natural stone. So that is how it was done. So that is Kavi. So if you touch Kavi as such, you will you will not find any texture to it. It will be smooth. But the other technique called as graffito is a slightly different technique where the wall is plastered in lime already and it is dry, so it's not wet. So on the dry lime plaster, you plaster it again with the red soil. You give a red plaster over the white plaster. And when the red plaster is wet, you carve out the designs on the red plaster to expose the white underneath. So now what happens, if you touch it, you will feel the differences in the levels. The red will be above and the white will be behind. So it will be slightly raised. So that is graffiti. So what you see on the top is Kavi art from the Holy Spirit Church in Margaon, from my parish in Margaon. So this is no longer living, but is rather killed, I would say, on purpose. Okay. So killed by some priests who were not very concerned about art. And when I went personally to ask them why they did that, they said it was dull and had to be repainted. So that such ignorance is seen in churches and temples and other households also.
When was this?
This was probably in 2018, 17, 18, around that time. Okay. So in fact, this was in the corridor of the residence of the priest. Okay. So similar Kavi also existed in the full church at a level of about 1.5 meters. The whole nave of the church had this Kavi, which was never visible. So recently when the church was painted off, they had stripped off the paint to repaint the church, and that is the time the Kavi was visible. It was so beautiful, and I thought I actually went and approached saying that we'll do up this Kavi since we found it underneath. They said that they didn't have much time because the church was booked for weddings and had to be overpainted. So that's gone as well. So if it is overpainted, might be there is some salvation that can be granted unto this Kavi. But if the walls are plastered now, it is lost forever. Okay. So when you see this Kavi nowadays, what happens is people overpaint this Kavi. You know, they take oil paints and just redo. Now, many a times, though one way many of the artists and historians and architects might say, at least by overpainting, they are retaining the motifs, if not completely destroying the Kavi. At least the motifs are carried down the generation. Now, for us, we know, okay, the motifs are carried down the line. But as a conservator and an artist, you shouldn't be telling this to the person who overpaints. What he will think, it is okay to overpaint it with oil paint, as long as we are carrying ahead the motifs. So not only with Kavi, this goes with canvas paintings also. Someone will paint a canvas painting once again the way it was with Asian paints and say it is retained, carrying ahead the same painting but just repainted. So that is not the thing. You know that the motifs are retained, but such things shouldn't be mentioned to the custodians because they get to assume that doing such things is right. Okay, though it may help in carrying the motifs, no doubt, but that's not the right way to do it. Okay. But also, it is firstly, conservation is quite an expensive affair. Also, apart from being expensive, awareness is important among people who own these kind of works in their houses, in the chapels, and so on. Coming to the next slide, so Now, coming to the Mughal Emperor Akbar was so much fascinated with Goan Christian art that he sends his delegates to Goa, especially to spend some time with the goldsmiths and the metalsmiths in Goa. Okay. And after they learned the techniques, they went back to his court and worked there as well. Now, what you see is a crucifix on the side. It's about a meter and a half. This is the work done on it, though the picture is not clear here, it's called as repousse. Repousse is a technique of working on metal by hitting it from behind, so you get the impression from the front. And this follows the same technique that was used to make the casket of Saint Francis Xavier, where it has cutworks and behind of which there is velvet. So through the cutworks, the velvet is visible. So though the cross, the velvet is missing, the pedestal still has some of it. You can see the reddish color in between the silver. Yes, so there was. Now, everything Goan was not necessarily produced in Goa. Okay, so either stuff came accidentally or intentionally, and also as price. Now look at this little image. So it's a small image of Saint Anthony. It's about 4 to 5 inches. Look at his face. Is it looking like an Indian or a Chinese with a triangular face? So these are minute details that many of us tend to overlook at times. But this particular image is not a wooden image. It's made of rhinoceros horn, okay, and is painted. So this is one piece from my collection. So when I speak about Christian art, so initially when the Portuguese came to Goa, they came along with few European artists, and these artists, that was in the 16th century, early 16th century, and then gradually as Christianity started rising or increasing, these few artists who came could not cope up with the increase in demand for Christian art, and hence the government had no option but to give or allow local artists to make statues and sculptures. Okay. But these local artists had absolutely no idea of what Christian art is. They had never ever seen Christian art in their lives, and this was completely an alien topic to them. So what they do is they refer to works previously made by Europeans and replicate. And when they replicate, they kind of add their own mirch masala to it, okay, their own spices to it. And thus is born the unique art that we have today, that is Indo-Portuguese art, with the Indian elements and the European elements blended together. So that is what makes the art of Goa really unique and worth preserving, because you won't get it anywhere else. Okay. So this is what I have just told you. So this is what the locals did. They replicated works and incorporated their own style. So what you see here is hexagonal base. It's about of this size, and this base is made by a community called as the Chitari community of Angoli. It's not very old. It's early 20th century. Okay, and I found this in a chapel. And what it was used, so when I found it has 3 slots on the other side, on the reverse side, which were probably meant to insert legs, like 3 supports. And I thought it was a stool, and I took it to my parish and I showed it to an elderly priest, and he said that this was a ceremonial base. Now, what is a ceremonial base? Ceremonial base is something that was used to place the chalice once it was consecrated in Mass, during Mass. Okay. So if you go to the Museum of Christian Art, you will see something called as a ceremonial base cloth, which is on display, which is similar in shape, which is of this size, it's in velvet. So cloth like that would be placed onto a base like this, and the chalice would be then placed above it.
What is a chalice?
A chalice is a cup. It's a cup which is used for wine during Mass, and this wine is supposed to symbolically represent the blood of Christ when consecrated during Mass. So these chalices, anything in fact, not only chalices, which came in direct contact with the bread and the wine, had to be always made of precious metal, because they came in contact with God indirectly. Okay, so the best had to be given there, and hence silver or gold was generally used to make chalices, to make ciboriums, to make monstrances. There are different vessels that came in contact with the bread and the wine. Okay. So some parishes who could not afford and were not very rich, say, to make a solid gold or a solid silver chalice or a ciborium, they would opt for semi-precious metals like brass or copper. Okay, and if that was the case, they had to be gilded with silver or gold. Okay, so the surface that touched the came in contact with the bread and wine had to be coated in gold. So you see this very localized with bright hues and a reindeer in the center. Okay. Now, when these works were made, could it be that there was a lot of competition between the European artists and the Indian artists? So maybe the Indian artists, succeeded more, probably because of they would go selling idols door to door. We don't know. So it could be a possibility. Also, maybe why it could be a reason that many Indian artists chose to carve Christian sculpture, or probably more enthusiastic about carving Christian sculpture, because again, it's not mentioned anywhere. I just an assumption that earlier we all know that to carve Hindu sculpture you needed something called as to follow mudras, or certain positions of the deity. The length, the breadth, everything mattered very strictly. Now these norms were not there in Christian idols or statues. So there was more liberty given to the artists. Okay, so to carve whatever without those precisions that the mudras needed in the previous faith. So hence they were more comfortable in carving Christian sculpture more. That is a possibility also. Yes. But also interestingly, there was a ban in 1545 and also again in 1567 imposed on Hindus carving Christian sculpture. Now this could be maybe either because the Europeans faced a lot of competition and they were not getting that much of business as they would earlier, or it could have been also an indirect way of asking the Hindus to convert to Christianity. Why do I say this? Because say carving sculpture was an age-old tradition of the family, and they would earn their bread and butter through carving, making sculpture. To continue their occupation, they had to convert, because if only Catholics could carve religious sculpture, so that would have been an indirect way of asking them to convert as well. Now, here you see a basalt holy water font in the church of San Francisco de Assisi in Old Goa, okay, which looks like a lotus on the top, very Indianized. Okay. It could have been from a temple as well, something sourced from the pre-existing temples. Okay. Now, basalt. When I talk about basalt, this stone is not native to Goa. You don't find so much of basalt in Goa that is sufficient to make floors of churches and facades of churches and so many, maybe sculpture also. So how did it land in Goa? How did it come to Goa? So it is said that the ships would sail from Basin or Basai to Goa, and when they sailed, they traveled empty. So to maintain the buoyancy of the ship and to balance it in the sea, they would fill in dead weight in the ships. And that is the stone that piled up and accumulated in Goa, and hence was repurposed on floors and facades and so on and so forth. But when I say that, you may have a question in your mind, but Frazer, there are temples in Goa that predate the Portuguese and also have basalt stone. How did the stone come there if I say the basalt came with the Portuguese? How did the basalt come there? Any answer? So look at the Tambi Surla temple, look at other temples also, they have a lot of idols made of basalt. Even on our hills, we have a lot of idols that are found in Uragals and things like that.
Neighboring states?
Sorry?
From neighboring state?
Yes, possibly. Because before the Portuguese came to Goa, we had nothing called as Goa, first of all. It was a whole one conquered landmass which was referred to as by different names. And they would have sourced this stone from beyond the boundaries of today's Goa. So when I say it's not found in Goa, I'm talking about the map of Goa today, which was under the Portuguese from 1510 to 1961. So that is the most likely answer. Now, were these bends that were put effective? Were they, you think so? No, they were not effective. So why they were not effective? The possible reason is that these images were not only made for churches. Artists made sculpture even for houses, and probably if these house owners were okay with having statues and sculptures made with Hindu influences or other influences of other faiths, and didn't have any problem with that. So hence the church could not control this at the local level and in the houses of people. So these things kept happening, and hence these bends were not so effective both the times. Okay, they were just there. Coming to textiles, what you see here are textiles in velvet. The one on the top is in velvet, the one below is silk, both with silver thread embroidery. The top one is a cave of a small statue of infant Jesus, while the down one is a cloth that is a veil meant to cover the chalice. It's a chalice veil. So this is the cloth used to be imported from different parts around the world, but the embroideries were made here in Goa by one of the place known as the Convents of Santa Monica in Old Goa. The Convent of Santa Monica in Old Goa was a cloistered convent, and these nuns were known for their embroideries that they made. Okay, and probably they sold these embroideries, the work that they made across different churches in Goa. Also, there were embroideries that were done for religious works by different families. So there is one family in Raya also, whose ancestral occupation was making vestments for churches. Okay, so I met them, I spoke to them. I would not have known about them. It was a coincidence, but a good thing that we found. My dad's house had a chapel outside, and there was some stuff that we found there of the chapel, and among those things were quite a few vestments that I found. And one of the vestments behind had a tag which stated Raya. And I had a friend in Raya, and I asked him, is there someone in Raya who makes vestments? He said, yes, there is someone behind my house. I'll take you there if the same guy, just check. And I went there with a photograph of this vestment, and he said, yes, this is from our family. And he says, but we have never made these kind of vestments, at least in my times, in our time, the way before. And I then got to know a lot from them. So like this, there were different places where religious embroideries and vestments were made across the state. Okay, so Raya was also one place that I can say. Now, when these embroideries were made, apart from religious embroideries, coming to other embroideries. So in India and in Goa, it was compulsory for every girl to learn embroidery. Okay. It was like a passing test for her to pass her wedding proposal. Now, how was it a passing test? So in fact, every girl had to learn embroidery, and when she went to learn embroidery, she would be given a 1 meter by 1 meter cloth, or a rectangular or a square cloth, which was called amostra. Amostra means symbol in Portuguese. So on this amostra, they would do different kinds of embroideries. Whatever they would learn, they would do each type of embroidery on that. So it had all the different things that they learned. And during their proposal time, when she went to the groom's house with the proposal, she had to present this amostra to the groom's family. And what the groom's family would do is choose one design from all those that were seen there, and ask the bride to stitch a wall hanging using that embroidery style that they choose. So this would generally be a religious portrait or a floral decoration or whatever. But this is how it used to work. So I still have my grandmother's amostra, also the wall hanging, and also the embroidery hoop that she studied embroidery on, which I have preserved at home. Okay, so this is how it was. Also, when these embroideries were made, there was the influences were different types of Jain, Mughal, and European origin. Okay, and you see now a unique feature about Goan textiles is you see ivory stitched onto textile. For example, if it's a figurative design of, say, Mother Mary on a banner or a flag, you will see the heads and the hands stitched in ivory. The rest is cloth. Okay, you will not find this in anywhere, any other part of the world. In Malaysia, I guess you find wood being stitched onto textile. Okay, not ivory. So ivory is still there. I have not come across any place that has ivory stitched on textile.
Do you have a sample or a photograph?
I can send it to you. I don't have it right now. Okay. So, secondly, in addition to giving a 3D or 3 dimension to textiles using ivory, many of our embroideries, even this embroidery, after you can have a look, is slightly raised, it's slightly high. Okay. Now, how that elevation was given, that 3-dimensional feel was given to embroideries. So what was done is, underneath the embroidery thread, they would actually put leather and stitch on top of the leather to give it that, what we say, what is the right word, relief. Yeah. So, yeah. Metal works. Yeah. So Goa was known for, and India was known for has a rich metal work history. Okay, since ages. Okay, and even in Goa, for example, a place in Veli, Raya, these places were known for metalworks. In fact, Saint Francis Xavier is said to have come to Veli, and for not very long time, for some time, maybe a day or two. And when he came there, he writes in his letters that he didn't get sleep, probably because of the sound that the metalsmiths were creating. And he mentions the sound that was created by the metalsmiths of Veli. Okay, so, and a lot of this is inspired by Islamic works in Goa.
Which year was this or era?
What is that?
The time you just mentioned, 16th century, Xavier?
Yes, 16th century. He came here in
Late.
1542. So yeah, Raya, Kamboli, Lopani, that's the name of the villages. So in fact, during the reign of the Portuguese king Dom Manuel I, many goldsmiths came to Lisbon, and among them was Raul Jatim, who was actually kind of baptized, and his godfather was the viceroy of Goa. That is, you have his name is Constantino de Braganza. So he was his godfather. Okay, Raul Jatim. So you have different other artisans taken to Portugal and asked to make a lot of stuff for the churches there. So whenever these works were made, they were under the strong eye of the person who commissioned them. They were not given as a lot of freedom also as to in the works they made, keeping an eye on what details they used, what figures they showed in the works they made. Okay. Probably because they were afraid that you would have neo-converts getting back to their older faiths while having hidden motives of Hindu elements in the artworks carved in Christianity. Okay, so what you see here is this casket. It's a small casket from the early 20th century. It's in silver and contains a rosary beads, okay, which is used to tears, that is the 1/3 of the rosary. And then you have a cross made again in Rakuse silver, mounted on wood, and the sash and the dove shown in gold. Here you have an interesting painting on canvas. You see this in the Shah Cathedral in Old Goa. Looking at him, does it remind you of any Indian figure? Yeah. Yes. So that is what it was made to look like, probably by local artists, Vasudev carrying Krishna crossing the river Yamuna. So wearing a dhoti also. So this is how we see, and the tunic here has no buttons, which is said to have been a European modification. So this is what I told you.
Indian, not Indian, let's say Hindu influence on the Christian art started in Goa only, or
It could have been not only in Goa, it could have been throughout India.
okay, because lots of for example, Mother Mary is depicted in the sari.
Yes.
Okay, and like that, some examples are there.
Like the one in Velankani. Now
Yeah,
that,
Velankini.
now that is a separate thing. Now that didn't come because of the influences of the artistic thing, styling by people. But that came in because of the apparition that was like that. So Mary was visible to one who saw her in that attire. So that is why she is represented like that. So it can be shown in the way she was seen, or it could be artistic influences like this.
There is one example in the Museum of Christian Art also. There is one small sculpture in
Yes.
ivory.
Yes.
Uh,
Nirmala
it's
Mata.
mentioned,
Yes. On the
in
lotus.
sari.
Yes. So those would be, that is a very recent piece from the 20th century. Okay, so those would be probably made on purpose to Indianize the things.
It is purposely let go from the church to doing those things to spread or like
Yes, I told you about this. Now you see a missile stand here and another one on visible here. So what you see here is it's called a lectern, okay? And in the center, you see it is a very bright orange color again, which is a very Indian saffron color. The arch below, the lower part is very Indianized. You see like the arches. And in the center you see the IHS. So IHS is something that you will see most likely in Jesuit commissions. Okay, not always, but 99% kind of a thing. Now, the Jesuits use this abbreviation as their identifying symbol. Okay, so whenever they commission anything, they would use the IHS, marking the Society of Jesus. I stands for Jesus, H stands for Hominum, and S is Salvator. Jesus Hominum Salvator, Jesus the Savior of mankind in Latin. And below which you see the 3 nails used in crucifixion of Christ. And above the H is a cross. Okay, so this you will see on most Jesuit commissions, they use it there. But I say most and not all because things like this also would happen. Like for example, say I studied in a Jesuit institute. Say I studied in Loyola, and there I was fascinated with some artwork which had an IHS. I go home and I ask someone to commission, and I commission something which also has an IHS because I just like the design. Now it does not mean that the piece at my home is of Jesuit influence. No, it was made by referring to something else. So it was not it is not necessary that every piece with an IHS is of Jesuit origin. But most of them are. And then you have this infant here, which is right here. So shown in a very notorious position, a very notorious dancing manner like Balakrishna. Okay. Also wearing a kada, which is very Indian. Here you see. Okay, wearing a kada. And the hair, if you look at it, is like snails, which probably came because of the snails that adorn the head of Gautam Buddha. And this is the Buddhist influence that you see here. Now, things like these, like the kadas and all, would not have been originally part of this image and could have been added at a later stage down the years when people made vows to offer something on fulfillment of their vows. Okay? So they would be added later at a later stage, most likely. Now, this one is a copper kada. Yes, so certain Indianness was allowed in locally made works to make people feel at home in a new way. A nice example of this I will give you is architectural elements of buildings. Okay, for example, if you go to Margao, if you pass by the Holy Spirit Church in Margao, the bell towers, if you pay attention to, okay, on the tips of the bell towers, the finales of the bell towers, you will see pots, and in the pot you will see like flames showing. Now, flames and a pot full of fire in Christianity is supposed to represent the love of God emanating as flames. But those who made these flames made it look like a kalash, a pot with mango leaves and a coconut in the center. So that is what you will see as the church in Margao. Okay. So another interesting feature about this I will show you, tell you is about Indian element is in the same church in Margao, you will see Mother Mary shown standing on a peacock, like Parvati standing on a peacock. Okay. Apart from this, you will see some Islamic influences. You will see many a times the doors of churches painted green, like our church in Margao. The spirit again has green doors. Green comes from Islam, where it means life in a deserted land, and the church was considered to be the source of eternal life in a desert. So hence the green color there. Okay. Apart from this, you will find a lot of lotus motifs also around. Very interesting, you might see outside churches huge tall white crosses outside the church, in the church compound. Very ornate and decorative crosses. So these crosses are called as Cruz Piazza or Piazza crosses. Piazza crosses means crosses for the public. Now why were they built there? So in Goa, at least some art historians are of the opinion that these are hybridized versions of the deep stambha that you see outside temples. So just like people lit oil lamps outside a temple, when they got converted to Christianity, they could light candles outside at the Piazza Cross, outside churches. So that is why these were built outside churches. Okay. Also, several Islamic influences on Christian art would be inlay works. So when you have Akbar, who's fascinated with Goan Christian art just like me, so what he does is he invites Goan priests to his court, and when these priests visit him, they take along with them some carpenters from Goa, and these carpenters were trained by Muslim artists from Fatehpur to do this kind of inlay work. If you go to the Museum of Christian Art again, you will see a chester, a counter desk with teak and rosewood inlay, also with ivory. So this is very Islamic representation, which was taught to Goans by Islamic artisans at the court of Akbar, who later came to Goa and replicated similar works. Another very Indian influence is baby Jesus, like we see here represented as Bal Krishna, sucking his thumb after he stole butter. Okay, with typical Indian jewelry like the waistbands and the anklets that you see there. Coming to the materials used in sculpture or works in Goa, not only sculpture but other. So the wood generally used to make sculpture in Goa was two types. There was something called as shivan. Shivan, the scientific name is Melina arborea, or it could be teak. Okay, teak wood was also used to make sculpture. Now, shivan is a wood that is white and is quite light in weight. So hence it would be used to build altars on a height, because at a height you needed lesser weight. So hence this wood was preferred, and also shivan and teak was much more easier to carve because it's softer than other materials like ebony. Now, ebony was also used in some cases, which was rarer, and maybe the wealthier families would sometimes commission pieces made of ebony. Okay, where this was imported and carved here. Now, ebony is a wood that would actually sink if you place it in water, while other would float. Ebony sinks. Okay, so this was also made, but are fairly rarer in number. Apart from ebony, you have ivory also that was made, ivory sculpture that was made. To look alike ivory, they would substitute with bone. Bone was also used to carve sculpture. The types of bone used would be fox bone, cattle bone, that would be used. Okay. Even deer horn would be used. Like I showed you, rhinoceros horn was also used. Okay. So, different materials. Now, these could be entire pieces, or sometimes they could be a combination of two materials. Such pieces are referred to as composite pieces, where you have more than one material. Like the full image would be in wood, but the hands and the face and the feet might be of bone or ivory. Okay, so such examples also exist. So yeah, so ivory came from outside, but was also carved in different other places like Tamil Nadu in India. But Goa was known for its world-class ivory that was carved here. It was carved in two places called Ribandar and Chimbel. Okay, and still today the descendants of this family are there. It's known by Vaman Zor. Okay, and they come under the class called Vishwakarma Brahmins, who are devout followers of Lord Vishwakarma, who is believed to be the god of craftsmen. Okay, so nowadays, but since ivory is not used anymore, they have changed over to only wood. They do only wood carvings, and Mr. Vaman also undertakes works such as furniture, not just the religious nowadays. So how would you identify for a layman? It would be difficult to know what is bone and what is ivory. They both look alike at a distance. Right? So basic ways of identifying ivory would be firstly the weight. Ivory is heavy, bone is light. Secondly, ivory is solid, bone is porous. It would have small pinholes kind of things which are spaces for the blood vessels. So we will see that in bone. And apart from that, stone sculpture was also made generally for placement on facades of churches outside the church. Or sometimes it would be even in the interior, but mostly outside. Basalt stone was used if it was made here in Goa, or even marble at later stages, it was imported from outside. Generally, Italian sculptures for marble. Stone sculpture would be carved by, basalt sculpture would be made generally by artists from Penne. Okay, a few artists from Penne would carve basalt. Yeah. So these are the different other places where ivories were carved. What you see here is one example of baby Jesus sleeping in a four-poster bed. Now this is part of a nativity set dating from the 18th century, where you have the image, the whole set in something called as cage dolls. What are cage dolls? Cage dolls are when you have the whole image is not actually carved. It's just you would have kind of wooden things which are just fixed together, and only the hands and the feet and the face, only what's visible is actually carved. The rest is just roughly made, and then you have dresses or vestments stitched for these dolls. So only what's visible is actually carved in a very light weight. So the whole set we have in our home, and this is part of that nativity set. Here you have an image of Santa Anna, Saint Anne. If you pay attention, though if the front view is not very clear, but from the side, the arms of the chair are the faces of a peacock. Okay? One is broken, the other is intact. Yes, so coming to the infant that you see here. So infants, there is a concept, I have just written an article a few months ago. It was called The Bride, the Reason for God to Travel. What does this mean? Do you understand anything by the bride being a reason for God to travel? So it means there is a unique custom in Goa that, say suppose a girl getting married from a place called Veli, or take Panjim. Someone getting married from Panjim to Margao, for example. Which is the patron, who is the patron of the Panjim area? Our Lady of Immaculate Conception, right? They have the church dedicated by her. So along with her wedding trousseau, she would be given an image of Our Lady of Immaculate Conception, which she would carry along to her husband's place, where she would spread that devotion in her new home at her husband's place. So that practice of taking the patron along was seen and is still seen among all communities in Catholicism. Okay? Even amongst Hindus, some Hindu families have the concept of taking Bal Krishna. Okay? Now, what I told you about taking the patron is common among all Catholics, but in addition to this practice, there is another practice that is followed only among two communities in the state, the Brahmins and the Kshatriyas. Now, when I say Brahmins and the Kshatriyas, how can they be Brahmins and Kshatriyas in Catholicism? So the fact is that when these people converted to Christianity, they said we want our castes to be retained in Catholicism, only then we are agreeing to convert. So that is how you have the caste system prevalent even in the Catholic Church. And at that point of time, the church had to agree to all of this to encourage people to convert, because if they had to deny this, they would not have converted. Okay, so hence you have the caste system here. So much so that they also demanded for the privileges that they got in their earlier faiths. Like for example, in Hinduism, you have only the Brahmins, and in few instances the Kshatriyas can become priests or bhatts in the temple. So the same practice continued in the church, where only Brahmins and Kshatriyas were allowed to become priests in the church till the 1960s. As of now, the seminary is open to all sections of society. Okay, so that is not there. Not only becoming priests, even when there was a death, families insisted that we belong to a certain caste and we be given certain privileges in the church at the time of burials. So much so that there was the cemetery. Now you see cemeteries, every church has a cemetery, right, outside the church. But that's a recent concept, recent as in it came in the mid-18th century. It came, and in some parishes probably even in the 19th century. Before that, all burials would happen inside the church, and it was called as intramural church burials. And how was it? The grounds of the floors were divided into three classes, class 1, class 2 and class 3. And I belong to a high caste, so I got a grave close to the altar. You belong to a lower caste, you go ahead, you go far away from the altar. So that is how it was in the church. That is the time the church catered to the aristocracies and the rich. Hardly any lower sections of society went to church. And in local terminologies, they were called as Batlane to Le Cristão, the local community. Why Batlane to Le Cristão? Because a Batli is a bottle basically. And a bottle has a narrow mouth, so their faith was limited. They didn't know much about Catholicism. So they were referred to as Batlane to Le Cristão. But today, if you see, it's the other way. It's a good thing that actually the church is open to all sections of society. But the so-called elite and those who played a major role in churches then are today least concerned about churches. Okay? And today you see in my own parish, hardly any parishioners of that church come to that church. They just go to any church that they feel like. Okay? And hence, they don't know what is happening in the church. Forget about taking care of the artworks in the church. So that is also another thing that we see in churches happening here. Okay, so I was talking about this baby Jesus. So it was given in the wedding trousseau, with the wedding trousseau amongst the Brahmins and Kshatriyas, with the hope that the couple would conceive a boy child very soon. Okay, and these images would be made generally of four materials. They would be made of ivory, of bone, of wood, or of silver. Okay, four materials were generally used, and mostly it would be given in a cradle made of silver. Now in this case, it's a casket made of silver. And this bigger box that you see was also a casket that at one point contained an image of the infant, which is now missing. But you see it, the image also carved on the lid of the casket, okay, held up and high by two angels. And interestingly, this casket is carved out of sandalwood, which is very rare in Christianity. You don't find sandalwood works in Christianity. Okay. Apart from these representations, you also find another representation where baby Jesus is shown thinking like that. Okay, also a pose of Buddha and probably thinking about his passion to come. Okay. Yeah. Now look at this. How is he shown? So when people were converted to Christianity, they said, how can we worship a dead God? We are not used to worshipping a dead God. For God to listen, he has to be alive and he should have eye-to-eye contact with you and me. So, for that reason, to satisfy the needs of the neo-converts, the artists actually made images of Christ at a stage where Christ was shown just before he was dead. Because if he's dead, he had no control on his body and his head would be down. But if his head is up or looking straight, it means he's still alive. So that is what you see in both these images, that he's shown at a stage just before he dies, keeping into consideration the concept of darshan, or eye-to-eye contact with the devotee or the faithful. Also, there in that picture there, you see below the cross there is a skull, right? Have you seen the skull? And you might have seen a skull in many crucifixes earlier. The older crucifixes didn't have that. Now that skull has a very interesting story. So it is referred to as Adam's skull. You might have heard about Adam and Eve. Who are they? Okay. Adam and,
Apple story.
Apple story, yes. So they are said to have committed the first sin by eating the fruit from the tree forbidden by God. Okay. And that tree is considered to be the tree of death, from the tree of which they ate the fruit. Okay. And that is how that came into being and sin came into existence. Now the cross on which Christ died is said to be the tree of life, which was victorious over death and sin. And hence, that skull that you see there is believed to be Adam's skull, and the tree of life being shown victorious over death, over Adam's sin, crushed beneath the cross. Okay? So it is mentioned that on scriptures that at 3 o'clock when Christ died, there was an earthquake at Golgotha, the place of crucifixion, and there was a blood drop that fell on the floor beneath the cross where the ground was open and the blood touched the skull of Adam. So that is a story that is there like that. But unfortunately, me as or you as laymen, if we don't know this, it's okay, we can always learn. But I feel things like these have to be taught to the clergy. Now why I said clergy is because this is my personal experience. After Easter, you have priests coming to bless your house. So like that, they came to my house. And what did they say? What did they tell my parents? They said, you can't keep a skull in your altar. It is evil. So take it off and burn it. Now what happens if such a priest is posted in a church? It is his authority. He would just randomly go and take the skull and dispose it off. What happens then? We lose art. So if the clergy is not aware of such kind of things, okay, then they are supposed to be knowing. It is resulting in loss of art. Now that's because it is in my house and I know the significance of that. I didn't listen to him. That is another question. But if someone who was not aware, and if a priest tells, it is definitely right, so you have to take it off. So that is what happens, and that is also resulting in loss of valuable artistic heritage. So this is what I told you, the concept of the darshan, having eye-to-eye contact.
But the priest also must be passing some exam to certify this thing.
Passing some exam to certify what?
To become a priest, there should be some kind of a screening where he will be knowledgeable about
9 years. They study for 9 years.
They study for 9 years, and in fact they have a subject on art and conservation, but I don't know, we probably don't take it in just for the sake of it.
I think that's the only subject they fail in.
So there was one priest who said, when I went to argue with one priest, he said, if God is there in the heart, we don't need art. So that is what he said to me, and I was stunned. Okay, I said, I can't talk anymore to this fellow. But yes, so we face a bit tough time. So coming to the Christian-Muslim dialogue, I already spoke about some influences when it came to King Akbar and things like that. Now looking at these murals, so this is in the church of Santa Monica in Old Goa, and this is of both these pictures. So here you see azulejos. These are called as azulejos. Why are they called azulejos, you think? Any
From the azures.
from the?
From the azures.
No. Could it be because of the blue color?
Yeah.
Same.
No, that's the wrong answer. So many of us think that it is because it is blue, it is called azure. Not at all. So the word azulejos does not come because of azul, but rather it comes from an Arabic word, al-zulaj. Al-zulaj means a polished stone. And azulejos have their origins in Persia. From there they moved to Portugal, and no doubt from Portugal they also came to Goa. But these tiles that you see here are not from Portugal. There are references that mention that these tiles could have been brought from Bijapur during the Mughal period. Okay. And even the stencil work. So this is not kavi. What you see here is not kavi. It is paintings. So paintings can be either frescoes or murals. What is the difference between frescoes and murals? So a fresco, the word comes from the word fresque. Fresque meaning fresh. What is fresh? The plaster is fresh. So when the plaster is fresh and wet, you paint on a wet plaster so that the pigments are absorbed by the plaster. And these frescoes are more durable as compared to other murals because in murals the paint may tend to peel off with age from the dry walls. But in frescoes they remain for a longer time because the pigment is absorbed by the plaster.
Frazer, on the left hand side below the gold, there's a small red patch there.
Yes, that is kavi.
Oh, that's carving.
Yes.
I thought it was a larger piece.
No. So that is the only part that they had found while restoring the church. So they have retained only that. The rest is all mural. So yeah, in 1556, Akbar got to know that the Jesuit priests refused some fellows from Bengal forgiveness when they came to confess. Probably they refused forgiveness because they had not paid taxes. So Akbar was fascinated with this and he wanted to study Christianity even more. And he invited 2 more priests from Goa to visit his court. Because of that, they could actually do well in Akbar's this kingdom. Okay. So the honesty of the priest touched Akbar, and hence you have all of this happening. So in 1578, Akbar sent 2 ambassadors to Portuguese Goa with a letter requesting for 2 more priests. Okay, who were quite well versed in scripture. So after that, coming to another a little addition to what I spoke about right now is the loss of beauty in Christian art today. So as I said earlier, the church used to cater to the rich and the upper sections of society. And hence, pieces in the churches were commissioned by the aristocracies. But now, the church is open to all sections of society. And hence, the one who is not so rich also might be wanting to donate something to the church. But obviously, he would not want to pay that much to the artist. And hence, the artist would not put in that much of effort as he would do earlier. So that could be one reason because of for the downfall of the artistic elements of the churches today. The second reason is that after the 1960s, that is the Vatican Council II that happened, the church's one motive was simplicity, okay, and elaborate decoration was discouraged by the church. And hence the church also didn't pressurize these artists to beautify and glorify things in that way, and hence we have loss of artistic elements seen in Christian art in today's times. Okay. So coming to why we lose religious artworks today, there could be 2 possibilities, or rather 3 possibilities, I think. So one reason is that today we all like to appreciate heritage, but we don't like to live in heritage. That is irony. We all say, wow, such a beautiful heritage house, but when we live in a heritage house, we say, oh my God, it's difficult to maintain, let's get rid of it. So this is what happens today. When a lot of custodians of these houses and other religious works like these want to dispose religious works because so as to upgrade their religious spaces and their prayer rooms. And in the bargain, they discard these old statues. Right? That is one reason for modernizing their houses. Second reason is that we are all Indians and proud Indians, but there are sometimes some things that are not so good in our culture that we need to get rid of. One example is that Indians believe that broken idols are inauspicious and hence do not venerate broken idols. So the same concept when Christians, Hindus, a lot of Hindus got converted to Christianity, cropped into Catholicism. And hence, even till date, you see, okay, that statue has a broken arm, don't keep it in your altar, it's a bad omen, dispose it of. So that is what is happening today in the churches and in the houses where people don't want to keep broken idols. that is another reason why we lose a lot of religious art, okay, because of this concept. Thirdly, there is another reason of lack of awareness among society. There are several instances that I will tell you. I gave you one example of the Kabi, that how it was repainted in the Church of Holy Spirit. Coming to my place, Fatorda. Have you heard about Fatorda? Might have heard. There is a beautiful chapel of Our Lady of Rosary in Fatorda. Now it is very good that the old chapel is refurbished and reused as a space for adorning the Blessed Sacrament. But there is something not so good that they have done there, in spite of myself personally going and requesting the priest not to do that. So the ceiling of that chapel has a vault. It has a barrel vault. And this whole wall had a beautiful painting by Jose Pereira, Dr. Jose Pereira. And in the center there was Christ shown in a very angry look. And on the side there was all destruction of nature. And Christ shown in a very angry appearance there. So Mr. Jose Pereira had started this work, and the face of Christ was done using the actual technique of fresco painting on wet plaster. While later, as time progressed, since his health didn't support him much, the rest of the painting was completed by two of his students who were non-Catholics again, but it was a brilliant job, but not done in the fresco technique. It was the mural, the rest of it. And recently, when Reverend Father Karm was there, what he does is he paints over the whole fresco. We get the news that he wants to paint it, and we go and meet him. We show him Dr. Jose Pereira explaining the meaning of that painting. Still, he says in a very harsh manner, he says, "To tsopa Dio disota, to deonsar disota." He looks like a devil more than God. His words. So this is something that I cannot bear personally, and I stopped going to that place after that. So these are some things that are really not acceptable in the clergy. If a priest talks like this, it is not acceptable, because they are the custodians of these things. They are the good shepherds who are supposed to take care of these buildings. Okay. Another example of such instances in my very own chapel where I come from, Patorda, Ambashi. You have outside the chapel was a rectangular tank. Now this tank was traditionally used to prepare lime wash for painting the chapel. That time we didn't have ready-made lime, so your paint had to be made at home, at the on-site. So they would get shells, put them for soaking there, and pound it for months until it was suitable for painting. Then there was a guy called a Kayador. Kayador is a painter who would come. There was a community called Kayador. So they would come. They would not come with a brush like we paint with brushes today. They would come with a tall bamboo, a long bamboo, and to it they would tie palm leaves and create a brush then and there, or even coconut husk they would tie. Okay? And then they would dip it in that and paint the chapel. Now this tank, since it's not used, just 2 years ago it was demolished. So this is part of heritage which is destroyed by us. Okay, and we blame the government for everything that the government is doing, not blaming ourselves. What we have in our hands, why aren't we respecting and protecting it then? Coming to another interesting art form. I will show you. So this, what you can't see it from there. So look at this work. What do you see? Isn't it pretty? These lights. So this technique is called as estufado. Estufado is a technique which originated in the Gothic period, somewhere around the 12th century, but was very prominently used in the 18th and the late 17th and the early 18th century. Now how this is done? So what is done here is the full surface is coated in gold, and then you paint over the whole surface so you cannot see the gold. When the paint is fresh, you take a sharp tool and you scrape off the paint where you want to expose the gold underneath, thus giving it an appearance of brocade. Okay, so that is how it was made.
How old is this piece?
This is 18th century. Yes.
Source?
Source from our chapel.
Oh, you broke the door to bring it here.
I didn't break it. It was supposed to be burned. I rescued it. Yes. So, yeah. Now coming back to the initial designs of these altars and things that we see in Goa came from the ships that the Portuguese sailed in. Okay, so the first designs came from the chapels that were in the ships. Okay, coming to something called as conservation and restoration. I'll just brief you about that. So conservation and restoration. So what is conservation? Conservation is when, first of all, you do something and in such a manner that a particular piece is retained as such without recreating anything. Like for example, if there is a paint loss, I would not repaint that part which is missing. A restoration would be completing what is missing. Okay. Now, if it is my personal collection, I personally stick to conservation. I don't do restoration. But if suppose say it's in a church, a broken statue will not be accepted. So then you have to complete it. But when you are doing such interventions, it is necessary to document what you do. By suppose say this hand is missing and I do this hand now. After another 70 years, someone should not say that that hand is also 270 years old like the statue. They should know that that hand was added at a later stage. Secondly, what you are doing has to be reversible. It cannot be permanent. Whatever you do has to be reversible. Any intervention that you do. Okay. Thirdly, documentation, as I said, photography is necessary. Okay. Whenever you start any process, the before, during, and after photographs are a must that you have to do. Now, why did I personally go in this area of preserving religious art? So initially, I started collecting and preserving everything that was Goan, which was old. And that started in 2014 when I visited the Prince of Wales Museum in Bombay. And when I returned back, my dad started saying that, we have a couple of these things in our ancestral house, and then I had paid no attention absolutely to all these things. So then after I came back from there, I started discovering these things in my own house, like plates and things like that, not religious art. And that continued till 2014. And in 2014, there was an incident that I have to mention here, is that outside our chapel, one morning I went to sweep with a broom, and I saw a box full of old statues kept there. And I come at home and I tell Mama, I said, there are these images there, why would they be kept at the chapel? So she started telling me, if anyone does not want religious idols, they would keep them at roadside crosses or chapels to deteriorate by themselves, or they would burn it at home itself. So that is the way that how people dispose religious works. So that is what struck this thing in me. I said, okay, this is happening in my village, what is happening in the rest of Goa? And that is the time I directed myself towards religious art from 2014 onwards. And I have, as a school boy, as a college boy, always used my pocket money to buy these things from people who would dispose them. Also, many have gifted me a lot of things. Okay. And today I have saved about more than 1,000 objects from 17th to the 20th century in my collection. Here are few of them that I will highlight in some time, but yeah, you face a lot of discouragement. There were places, there was even a priest who called me a pornekar or a scrap dealer because I worked with these kind of things, and I insisted that some things from the church not to be disposed. He said, you only take care of old stuff, you don't look at the times. So yes, so he called me a pornekar. There were priests who told me, you're not in the committee, so we don't want your suggestions. So such kinds of things you also have to face, but I really don't, it does not matter to me, but I keep doing what I have to do. Secondly, many a times we want to do good to the pieces that we have, but because we are not aware of how to go about with these things, we actually end up causing more damage than good to these pieces. Like we might end up varnishing pieces with furniture polish. Now varnish turns yellow with age, so your thing will turn yellow, and also it might be irreversible. Over time, the chemistry of that thing changes, and the bonding with the piece becomes more stronger, and it's difficult to take off even with solvents at a later stage. Okay. Yes, so after that, what I would like to tell you is certain do's and don'ts that you can, as individuals, follow at home for your own things that you own. First of all, think that you are living in a living museum and take care of what you have inherited. I always tell people, don't tell your children this is worth 10 lakhs. Say this is worth a lot of sentiments, then they will preserve this. Don't show them the materialistic value to these things. There are people who tell me, Frazer, that is iron and that is gold. Why do you value the same iron and gold in the same balance? For me, it does not matter as far as which material it is made of, as long as it's old, it is precious. Okay, that is what it should be. Secondly, how would you care? First of all, don't touch your objects with your bare hand. We as Indians have this habit of going to temples and churches and touching the idol and kissing the idol. I tell my friends personally, believe in flying kisses. God will still listen to you if you speak to Him from a distance. Don't touch. That is one major reason you are destroying your art. Okay. Use gloves generally. Okay. Now gloves like these are called latex gloves. These can be used for wooden pieces. But if you're handling something like silver, you don't use things like these. You use something called as nitrile gloves, which are blue in color generally. Not these, because these contain sulfur. And sulfur is bad for silver. Your silver will turn black very soon if it's clean, if it's polished. Also, avoid exposure to light. Keep your objects in darkness for most of the time. Okay? There is one interesting example I'll tell you in my very own parish. There is a niche housing a very precious, beautiful statue of Our Lady of Immaculate Conception. And the whole backing of that niche is made of silver. And that niche is sealed with a glass. And inside the niche, there are about 15 bulbs, tungsten bulbs. Okay? We all know silver is a very good conductor of heat. And with 15 bulbs in a closed case with a glass, you know how much that statue is going through. It will soon turn into powder because the wood will get dehydrated. So things like these are done out of love but cause damage. Okay? Do not expose your objects to such high levels of heat and light. Use LED bulbs. Nowadays we get them, so that is better. Okay? Do not store if you have silverware, do not store it in woolen materials. Don't store it in wool, don't store it with silk, don't store it in plywood, which is new. Okay? Because plywood tends to release some things which convert to something else which is acidic and hence would damage your usage. Do a termite check regularly. Regular cleanings may be done using dry brushes which are soft. Okay. Yes, okay. If you have old textiles, don't fold them and keep them. In fact, roll them and keep them. Sharp folds should be avoided always. If you are folding them, place a cotton padding and then have a rounded fold and store them. And after your timely checks, just reverse the fold. Don't fold it in the same direction every time. Okay. Apart from doing this, I have this thing of putting it in the heads of people, a concept of opting for greener gods. What is greener gods? I say don't destroy His creation in His name. What does that mean? Recently we celebrated Christmas. We celebrated Diwali. What do we do for these festivals? We make stars made of plastic. We use decorations made of plastic. We use thermocol in the crib that we make. After Christmas, what are you going to do with that? You see the roadside dustbins full of thermocol casseroles. Isn't right? Is God asking you to do that? No. Opt for greener gods. Today the market is full of plastic idols. Go to the market, you see fiber idols. Say no to that, because today we all know that if an idol is broken, we like to dispose it. Okay, so will you burn a plastic idol? Will you dispose it in water? How are you destroying his creation in his name? That is rubbish. So opt for greener gods. Opt for people who make wooden sculpture. There are still artists in Goa who are struggling with their businesses of making wooden sculpture. I, in fact, personally support a lot of these and encourage people to opt for these these statues because, firstly, you are opting for a sustainable material. Second, you are patronizing these traditional artists to carry on with their traditions. Okay, so that is a living heritage that we have. We need to carry ahead. So that is one thing I'd like to mention to you. So coming to these figures that you see here. So this is a very rare representation. First of all, in Goa, you will find a lot of titles of Virgin Mary, that Our Lady of Good Delivery, Nossa Senhora de Bom Parto. You will see Our Lady of Good Death, Bom Morte. So like this, different names, Our Lady of Pilar, Our Lady of Piety, so many names. But officially, the church has only 4 names, 4 titles given to the church. They are Mary, Our Lady, the Mother of God. You have the Immaculate Conception. You have the Mary of Perpetual Virginity and Our Lady of Assumption. So these are 4 titles that are officially accepted by the church. But apart from these, there are several other titles given by people like us who have devotions to Virgin Mary. Now, this image that you see here of Mother Mary is something that you will not find anywhere else in the world because it was commissioned by a family from Raya. Why it was commissioned? They had only one son, and they wanted that son to become a priest. And he was a party kind of a guy who never liked priesthood. They never thought he would actually go as a priest. So they had a lot of devotion to Mother Mary, and they said, if he becomes a priest, I will proclaim your name, giving you the title as the Queen of the Clergy. And hence he became a priest, and after he was ordained, this statue was made by the family. How is she represented? In her hand, she is shown holding a vestment of a priest, that is the maniple. So these devotions are personal titles given. So these are not accepted officially by the church, but they are personal devotions.